At Dad's will reading, they laughed. Then Widow CEO's grandson said 7 words. Welcome back and enjoy the story. The room was full, of expectation, of whispers, of relatives who hadn't made a single phone call in years, but now showed up, dressed in black and dripping in fake sympathy. They sat in leather chairs side by side, rehearsing polite sorrow and hidden greed. Eleanor Matthews sat perfectly still in the corner of the well-appointed law office, her spine straight, despite the arthritis that had begun to plague her in recent years. The sleek black dress she wore, tailored impeccably, as was everything, in her wardrobe, stood in stark contrast to her silver hair, which was pulled back into a tight chignon. At 72, she carried herself with the same dignity and quiet power that had helped build Matthews Industries from a small manufacturing company in Chicago to a nationwide enterprise with thousands of employees. The whispers around her were not quite subtle enough to escape her hearing. I bet the old man left her just enough to keep her in that nursing home, a nephew said with a smirk, adjusting his designer tie, purchased, Eleanor knew, with money Roger had lent him 3 years ago and which had never been repaid. She's had her time, another relative murmured. Matthews Industries needs young blood now. Eleanor kept her gaze fixed on the large mahogany desk, where Harold Winters, Roger's attorney for over 40 years, was organizing papers with methodical precision. She did not acknowledge the stares or the murmurs. She had spent 50 years as the wife of Roger Matthews and 30 as the co-CEO of Matthews Industries. She had weathered boardroom battles, economic downturns, and the casual misogyny of business in the 1960s and beyond. These whispers were nothing new. Beside her sat her grandson Thomas, just 12 years old, but with eyes that seemed to absorb everything. He reached over and placed his small hand over hers. The gesture nearly broke. Through her carefully constructed composure, Thomas had always been perceptive, perhaps too much so for a child his age. He was the son of her youngest, Michael, who sat across the room with a somber expression that matched the occasion. Unlike many of the others present, Eleanor knew his grief was genuine. "We'll begin now," Harold announced, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. The room quieted immediately, faces turning toward him with barely concealed anticipation. "I'll be reading the last will and testament of Roger Edward Matthews, as was finalized 3 months before his passing." Eleanor felt a momentary tightness in her chest. 3 months ago, just before the cancer had taken a decisive turn, when Roger still had good days mixed with the bad, when they could still sit together in the garden he had lovingly tended for decades and talk about everything and nothing at all. Harold began with the standard legal preamble, his voice steady and clear. Eleanor had always appreciated his professionalism, his loyalty to Roger that extended beyond the typical attorney-client relationship. He had been there through the company's growth, through the family's joys and sorrows. "To my son, Philip Matthews, I leave the family home in Lincoln Park and its contents," Harold read. Philip, seated near the front of the room, nodded solemnly. At 48, he was the oldest of their 3 children, always the most serious, the most dutiful. Eleanor saw relief wash over his features, not greed, but genuine emotion. The house had been in the Matthews family for generations, and Philip had always loved it more than anyone. "To my daughter, Rachel Matthews Klein, I leave my collection of first edition American literature and art, as well as my personal investment portfolio valued at approximately $8 million. Rachel, elegant in her grief, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. She had her father's passion for literature and art, spending hours with him in his library as a child, while Eleanor and Roger built the business together. "To my son, Michael Matthews, I leave my ownership stake in Matthews Technologies, the technology subsidiary of Matthews Industries." Michael's head lifted slightly. Matthews Technologies had been his project for the past decade, the division he had convinced his father to establish when the digital revolution began. It had been a risk that paid off tremendously. Harold continued reading, allocating shares of Matthews Industries to various nieces, nephews, and long-time employees who had been loyal to the company. Eleanor noticed the smiles, the exchanged glances, the mental calculations happening around the room as each person's portion was revealed. But there was no mention of her. Not yet. The tension in the room was palpable as people began to realize this omission. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed barely able to contain their satisfaction. Eleanor had been not just Roger's wife, but his business partner, making bold decisions that had sometimes saved the company from disaster. But in this moment, to many in the room, she appeared to be nothing more than an elderly widow being put out to pasture. The remaining shares of Matthews Industries, constituting a controlling interest of 51%, are to be divided among the board of directors as specified in Appendix A, Harold continued. A murmur ran through the room. Eleanor felt Thomas's hand tighten on hers. She gave him a reassuring squeeze in return, though her own heart had begun to race. This was unexpected. Roger had always told her. "Guess the old boss finally got replaced," came a whisper from somewhere to her left, followed by a poorly concealed chuckle. Eleanor did not turn to identify the speaker. She kept her eyes on Harold, who was shuffling through papers with a strange expression on his face. He looked up, meeting her gaze for just a moment before adjusting his glasses. "There is a final statement from the deceased," Harold said, his voice taking on a different tone. "Mr. Matthews requested it be read only after all distributions were announced." The room fell silent, every pair of eyes fixed on Harold as he unfolded a single sheet of paper that looked different from the legal documents he had been reading from. The paper was cream-colored stationery. Eleanor recognized it immediately as the kind Roger kept in his desk at home. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor, the backbone of everything I ever achieved," Harold began, his voice softening slightly. "You once told me not to leave you a penny that you had your own, but I leave you everything else, the authority to reverse every decision made here today if she sees fit. She is the executor. She holds all power of distribution." Gasps filled the room. Harold looked up from the letter. "That means all previous allocations are conditional," he clarified, though from the shocked expressions around the room, everyone had understood perfectly well. Every face turned toward Eleanor, the same widow they had dismissed, the same woman some had called outdated in boardroom meetings they thought she didn't know about. The same CEO who, according to rumors, had lost her edge. Eleanor stood slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze. She straightened her back, ignoring the twinge of pain that shot through her spine. She looked around the room, not with anger, but with a clarity that comes from decades of making difficult decisions. And then Thomas, who had remained quietly observant beside her the entire time, stood as well. His young face was serene but determined as he said, his voice clear and steady, "She built this family. She decides everything." 7 words. 7 words that changed the air in the room. No one laughed now, no one whispered. The silence was absolute. Eleanor didn't gloat. That had never been her way. She simply walked to the large mahogany desk, gathered the documents from Harold, who gave her a small knowing smile, and said, "I'll let you know what I decide." The room remained frozen as she walked out, Thomas's small hand in hers, her head held high as it had been through every crisis and triumph of her life. By evening, the news had spread through the extended Matthews family. Eleanor's phone rang constantly, but she answered none of the calls. Instead, she sat in Roger's study, surrounded by the books he had loved and the photographs that chronicled their life together. Thomas had stayed with her, seemingly understanding that she needed both company and silence. "Did you know?" she finally asked him, looking at her grandson over the rim of her reading glasses. Thomas shook his head. "No, but I wasn't surprised," he said with a wisdom beyond his years. "Grandpa always said you were the smartest person he knew." Eleanor felt a smile, the first real one since Roger's death 3 weeks ago, tug at her lips. "Your grandfather was a very intelligent man," she said, "but he could also be quite theatrical." "Is that why he did it this way? For drama?" Eleanor considered the question as she ran her fingers along the edge of Roger's desk. "Partly," she admitted, "but I think he also wanted everyone to understand something important. That you're in charge. That respect isn't automatic. That legacy isn't just about money or property. That the people who stand by you when things are difficult are the ones who deserve to stand with you when things are good." She looked at the photograph on the desk, Roger and herself on their 50th wedding anniversary, his arm around her waist, both of them laughing at something now forgotten. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "So what will you do now, Grandma?" Eleanor picked up the stack of documents she had brought from the attorney's office. "First, I'm going to read everything carefully. Then, I'm going to make some changes." She looked at her grandson with sudden intensity. "And then I'm going to teach you and your cousins how to run a business properly, because eventually it will be your turn." If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. The next morning, Eleanor rose before dawn, as had been her habit for decades. She dressed with care in a navy suit that had been tailored to perfection, applied minimal makeup, and secured her silver hair in its usual chignon. By the time her driver, Martin, arrived to take her to the Matthews Industries headquarters in downtown Chicago, she had already reviewed all the documents from the will reading and made several pages of notes. "Good morning, Mrs. Matthews," Martin said, holding the car door open for her. His face showed genuine warmth. He had been with the family for over 20 years. "Good morning, Martin," she replied, settling into the back seat of the sleek black sedan. "We'll be making a stop at Michael's house first." "Yes, ma'am." As the car pulled away from her elegant brownstone, Eleanor looked out at the Chicago streets coming to life in the early morning light. The city had changed so much since she and Roger had moved here as newlyweds in 1965. They had been young and ambitious, Roger with his engineering degree and Eleanor with her business acumen that had been largely dismissed by her own family. "What use is a business degree for a woman?" her father had asked when she'd announced her college plans. "You'll just get married and forget all about it." How wrong he had been. She hadn't forgotten a thing. Michael was waiting outside his modern Lincoln Park home when they arrived. At 38, he was the youngest of her children, and the one who most resembled Roger, not just in his physical appearance, but in his innovative thinking and quiet determination. He slid into the car beside her, leaning over to kiss her cheek. "You've caused quite a stir," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "I've done nothing yet," Eleanor replied. "Your father was the one who set the stage." Michael smiled. "Dad always did have a flair for the dramatic. But we both know he wouldn't have done it if he didn't believe you were the right person to make these decisions." He hesitated. "There have been some calls already, board members wanting to know what your plans are." "I'm sure there have been." Eleanor's voice was cool. "They'll know my plans when I'm ready to share them." The car wound through the morning traffic toward the gleaming 60-story building that housed Matthews Industries. As they approached, Eleanor felt the familiar surge of pride she always experienced when seeing the company headquarters. She and Roger had started in a tiny office with second-hand furniture and a single secretary. Now, the Matthews name stood in illuminated letters at the top of one of Chicago's most recognizable skyscrapers. Security greeted them with respectful nods as they entered the lobby. The whispers began almost immediately as Eleanor crossed the marble floor toward the private elevators. Employees stopped mid-conversation, watching her progress with wide eyes and hurried murmurs to colleagues. "Mrs. Matthews, we weren't expecting you today," said the receptionist, clearly flustered. "Clearly," Eleanor replied with a small smile, "but here I am." The executive floor was a hive of activity when they arrived. Eleanor noted with satisfaction that despite the 3 weeks she had been away while tending to Roger's final arrangements, everything appeared to be running smoothly. That was the mark of a well-structured company. It could function even when its leaders were absent. Denise, who had been Eleanor's executive assistant for the past 15 years, rose from her desk with visible relief. "Mrs. Matthews, thank goodness. The board has called an emergency meeting for noon. They didn't consult me about your schedule, and I've been trying to reach you." "It's all right, Denise," Eleanor said, patting the younger woman's arm. "I'm here now, and I'll be attending that meeting. In the meantime, would you please ask Philip and Rachel to join Michael and me in Roger's office as soon as possible?" "Of course," Denise replied, already reaching for her phone. Eleanor paused before entering her late husband's corner office. The nameplate still read, "Roger Matthews, CEO." She would need to have that changed. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy door. The office was exactly as Roger had left it before his final hospitalization, the same organized stacks of papers on the massive desk, the same collection of family photographs arranged precisely on the credenza, the same view of Lake Michigan stretching out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment, the grief Eleanor had been holding at bay threatened to overwhelm her. She could almost see Roger turning from the window, smiling at her entrance, making some wry comment about the board or a new project. Michael seemed to sense her hesitation. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Do you want me to have them come to the conference room instead?" Eleanor shook her head, straightening her shoulders. "No, this is where we should meet." She walked to Roger's desk, but didn't sit in his chair. Instead, she positioned herself by the window, looking out at the city they had both loved. Philip arrived first, his normally composed face showing signs of strain. "Mother," he said, kissing her cheek. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," she replied, studying her oldest child. Philip had always been the most traditional of her children, the one who followed rules and expectations to the letter. He had joined the company straight out of business school and worked his way up through various departments, earning respect for his thoroughness and dedication. He was currently the Chief Operations Officer, handling the day-to-day functioning of the company with remarkable efficiency. Rachel arrived minutes later, elegant as always in a burgundy dress that complemented her auburn hair. At 42, she was the middle child and had forged her own path, establishing the Matthews Foundation, the philanthropic arm of the company that supported education and the arts throughout Chicago. Her work had earned the company goodwill and respect beyond the business world. "I assume this is about yesterday?" Rachel asked, taking a seat on one of the leather sofas in the sitting area of the office. Eleanor nodded. "It is. I wanted to speak with the three of you before I meet with the board." "They're in a panic," Philip said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Uncle James called me last night, trying to get me to convince you to honor the original distributions." "Uncle James has been trying to get controlling interest in this company since before any of you were born," Eleanor said dryly. "Your father spent decades making sure that didn't happen. And now you have the power to determine everything," Rachel observed. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor moved from the window to stand before her three children. "First, I want to ask each of you a question, and I want honest answers." She looked at Philip. "Do you want the house because you love it or because of what it's worth?" Philip looked startled. "I love that house. I grew up there. Sarah and I have always dreamed of raising our children there, continuing the family tradition." Eleanor nodded, satisfied with the sincerity she heard in his voice. She turned to Rachel. "The art collection and the investment portfolio, what do they mean to you?" Rachel's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. "Those books and paintings, they were what Dad and I bonded over. Every piece has a story, a memory attached to it." She composed herself. "And the investments, they'll help secure the foundation's future. Dad knew that's what matters most to me." Finally, Eleanor turned to Michael. "Matthews Technologies, is that where your heart lies?" Michael didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. It's where we're building the future. It's where I can make the biggest difference." Eleanor felt a wave of pride as she looked at her children. Despite the privilege they had grown up with, each had developed a genuine passion and work ethic. Roger had been right about them. "Good," she said simply. "Then nothing will change regarding your inheritances. You'll each receive exactly what your father intended." The relief in the room was palpable, though Eleanor noted that none of her children had seemed particularly worried. They knew her better than that. "However," she continued, "the rest of the will is going to see some significant revisions. The controlling interest in Matthews Industries will not be distributed to the board of directors." "What will you do with it?" Philip asked. Eleanor smiled. "For now, I'll retain 30% ownership myself. The remaining 21% will be placed in a trust." "A trust for whom?" Rachel asked. "For the next generation, for Thomas and his cousins, your children. But they won't simply inherit it. They'll have to earn it just as each of you did. They'll work in the company, learn every aspect of it, prove themselves worthy of the Matthews legacy." Michael nodded, slowly. "That sounds like something Dad would approve of." It was actually his idea, Eleanor admitted. We discussed it many times over the years. The execution of it, however, will be mine. She checked her watch. Now, I need some time to prepare for the board meeting. Would you all please excuse me? As her children filed out, each embracing her before they left, Eleanor finally allowed herself to sit in Roger's chair. It was too large for her, but somehow it felt right. She opened the top drawer of his desk and found what she was looking for, a small leather-bound notebook filled with his distinctive handwriting. Ideas, observations, plans for the future of Matthews Industries, the future they had planned together. She opened it to a page marked with a small red tab. There, in Roger's bold script, was a quote he had often shared with young executives. "A business without succession planning is not a legacy. It's merely a successful moment in time." Eleanor traced the words with her fingertip, feeling closer to her husband than she had since his passing. "I won't let it be just a moment, Roger," she whispered. "I promise you that." The morning flew by as Eleanor reviewed financial reports and prepared for the noon meeting. At precisely 11:55, she stood, straightened her jacket, and made her way to the boardroom, Denise at her side with a stack of folders. The boardroom fell silent as she entered. 14 pairs of eyes followed her progress to the head of the table, the chair that had been Roger's for the past 5 decades. Some gazes were curious, others wary, a few openly hostile. Eleanor recognized them all: senior executives, family members with significant shares, long-time advisors. Some had been allies over the years, others had simply tolerated her presence, viewing her as Roger's wife rather than a business equal despite her position as co-CEO. "Thank you all for convening on such short notice," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. "I understand there are questions about the future of Matthews Industries following yesterday's revelations." James Matthews, Roger's younger brother, and the company's chief financial officer leaned forward. "Eleanor, I think we're all a bit confused about the situation. Roger's intentions regarding the company's shares seemed clear until that unusual codicil was read." Eleanor regarded him calmly. James had always been ambitious, but he lacked Roger's vision and Eleanor's strategic mind. The codicil was unusual perhaps, but entirely legal, as Harold Winters has confirmed. And Roger's intentions were indeed clear. He intended for me to make the final decisions regarding Matthews Industries. "With all due respect," began Victor Harrington, one of the senior board members, "at a time of transition like this, stability is paramount. The plan to distribute shares among the board made sense from a business perspective. We each have departments to run, responsibilities, and you will continue to run them." Eleanor interrupted smoothly. "Your positions within the company are not in question. The ownership structure, however, is changing." She nodded to Denise, who distributed folders to everyone present. "You'll find my revised distribution plan inside. The controlling interest of Matthews Industries will remain within the immediate family. I will retain 30% ownership, and 21% will be placed in a trust for the future generation of Matthews leadership." The room erupted in murmurs and exclamations. James's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is outrageous. Roger would never—" "Roger and I discussed this plan extensively," Eleanor cut in, her voice like steel beneath velvet. "Matthews Industries was never meant to become fragmented among distant relatives and board members, no matter how dedicated. It was meant to remain a family company, led by those who understand its values and vision." "And what happens when you're gone?" Victor asked bluntly. "Who leads then?" Eleanor smiled. "That's the beauty of succession planning, Victor. We prepare the next generation. My children have already proven themselves in their respective roles, and their children will have the opportunity to do the same." "This is about more than family sentiment," protested another board member. "This is about what's best for the company." "Indeed it is," Eleanor agreed. "And what's best for this company is leadership that understands its history, its core values, and its potential future. Roger built Matthews Industries on innovation, integrity, and commitment to its employees and community. Those values don't appear on balance sheets, gentlemen, but they are the foundation of our success." She looked around the table, meeting, each pair of eyes in turn. "I've been part of this company since the beginning. I've seen it weather recessions, technological revolutions, and personal tragedies. I helped design the organizational structure most of you operate within. I know what makes Matthews Industries strong, and it isn't quarterly profits or market share. Though we excel at both, it's people who care about more than their own advancement." The room had grown quiet as she spoke, the initial outrage giving way to grudging attention. "Now," Eleanor continued, "we have real business to discuss. The Jensen acquisition needs to be finalized by the end of the month. Michael has the latest projections for Matthews Technologies' new software division, and Rachel has updates on the Community Impact Program that's generating considerable positive press. Shall we proceed with actual company matters?" For the next 2 hours, Eleanor led the meeting with the same efficiency and insight she had brought to Matthews Industries for decades. By the time they adjourned, even her most vocal critics had fallen into the familiar rhythm of business under her direction. The tension hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something more productive. As Eleanor gathered her papers after the meeting, James approached her, his earlier anger now carefully controlled. "You won't get away with this," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Roger may have given you temporary power, but the board won't stand for it long term. We have investors to consider, shareholders who aren't family members." Eleanor regarded her brother-in-law coolly. "James, do you know why Roger never made you CEO despite your obvious ambition? It wasn't because you lack intelligence or business acumen." James's jaw tightened. "Enlighten me." "It's because you've never understood that a company is more than numbers on a spreadsheet. It's a living entity shaped by the values of its leaders." She gathered her papers and stood. "Our shareholders have enjoyed consistent returns under the Matthews family leadership for 50 years. I see no reason for that to change now." As she walked away, Eleanor felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The confrontation she had been dreading was over, and she had remained steady throughout. Roger would have been proud. More importantly, she was proud of herself. The afternoon stretched into evening as Eleanor worked through the backlog that had accumulated during her absence. Eventually, Denise knocked on her office door. "Mrs. Matthews, your grandson is here to see you." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "Thomas, send him in, please." Thomas entered, still in his school uniform, carrying his backpack. "Hi, Grandma. Dad said you'd be working late, so I asked if I could come see you." "That was thoughtful of you," Eleanor said, genuinely touched. "Have you had dinner?" Thomas shook his head. "Not yet." "Neither have I. What do you say we order something and eat together? You can tell me about school while we wait." As they shared Chinese food from white cartons, seated on the sofa in her office, Eleanor found herself relaxing for the first time that day. Thomas chattered about his science project and a book he was reading, his animated expressions reminding her so much of Roger that it made her heart ache with a curious mixture of grief and joy. "Grandma," Thomas said suddenly, his voice turning serious, "are people giving you a hard time about Grandpa's will?" Eleanor considered how to answer, wondering how much a 12-year-old should know about family business politics. Then she remembered Thomas's clear-eyed perception at the will reading and decided on honesty. "Some people are disappointed with how things are turning out," she acknowledged. "They had certain expectations that aren't being met." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Dad says Uncle James is really angry." "Your Uncle James has been angry about one thing or another for most of his life," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "But he'll adjust, as will everyone else." "What you said yesterday," Thomas began hesitantly, "about teaching me and my cousins about the business, did you mean it?" "Of course I did. Would you like that?" Thomas's face lit up. "Yes, Dad's taken me to his office sometimes, but I want to know everything about what you and Grandpa built." Eleanor felt a surge of emotion at her grandson's enthusiasm. "Well then, we'll have to set up a proper education program for you. Every Saturday, perhaps. We could start with the basics of what Matthews Industries actually does, and then move on to how a business operates." "That sounds amazing," Thomas said, his eyes bright with excitement. Looking at her grandson, so eager, so full of potential, Eleanor knew with certainty that the decisions she had made that day were the right ones. The Matthews legacy wouldn't end with her generation or even her children's. It would continue, through Thomas and his cousins, through all the future Matthews who would bring their own vision and values to what she and Roger had created. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "your grandfather always said that the most important asset any business has is its people, not its buildings or products or patents, but the people who pour their creativity and effort into making something valuable." Thomas considered this. "Is that why you're keeping the company in the family? Because we're the right people?" "Being family doesn't automatically make anyone the right person for anything," Eleanor corrected gently. "But being raised with certain values, being taught to respect the work and the workers, understanding the responsibility that comes with privilege, those things matter. And if you combine that foundation with education, experience, and genuine passion for the business, then yes, you might just be the right person to carry it forward someday." "I won't let you down, Grandma," Thomas said with sudden earnestness. "Or Grandpa." Eleanor reached out to smooth his unruly hair so like Roger's had been in his youth. "I know you won't, sweetheart. But remember, it's not just about us. It's about all the people who depend on Matthews Industries for their livelihoods. It's about the communities we serve. It's about building something that matters." As they finished their impromptu dinner, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose. The day had been challenging, but seeing Thomas's genuine interest in the family, business reminded her why all the struggles were worthwhile. There was something profoundly satisfying about creating a legacy that extended beyond one's own lifetime. Who would have thought that the young woman who had been told a business degree was useless for a female would end up here, sitting in the executive office of a major corporation, making decisions that would shape its future for decades to come, preparing the third generation for leadership. Life had a way of surprising you, Eleanor reflected, and sometimes those surprises were exactly what you needed to keep moving forward. The remainder of the week passed in a whirlwind of activity as Eleanor reasserted her presence in the company. Each day brought new challenges, resistant board members, concerned shareholders, curious employees. But with each challenge met and resolved, her confidence grew. She wasn't just Roger's widow stepping in temporarily. She was Eleanor Matthews, co-founder and CEO of Matthews Industries, finally taking her rightful place in the spotlight rather than standing in Roger's shadow. By Friday afternoon, exhaustion had begun to set in. Eleanor sat in her office. She had moved to her own space, rather than continuing to use Roger's, reviewing the week's events when Denise entered with a cup of tea. "You should go home, Mrs. Matthews," her assistant said kindly. "Everything is under control, and you've barely stopped all week." Eleanor accepted the tea gratefully. "You're right, I think I will. Would you please call Martin and ask him to bring the car around?" 20 minutes later, Eleanor was settling into the back seat of the company car when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. "Rachel." "Hello, dear," she answered. "Mom, are you still at the office?" Rachel's voice held an unusual urgency. "I just left. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly, but I need to talk to you. It's important. Can I come over to your place in about an hour?" "Of course, I'll be there." Eleanor ended the call with a frown. Rachel rarely sounded so serious. What could be so urgent that it couldn't wait until tomorrow? The answer came precisely an hour later when Rachel arrived at Eleanor's brownstone, carrying a thick folder and looking unusually tense. "I found something," she said without preamble, following Eleanor into the living room. "Something Dad was working on before he got sick." Eleanor felt a flutter of apprehension. "What is it?" Rachel placed the folder on the coffee table between them. "He asked me to help him research some of the company's early patents. I thought it was for the anniversary book we're putting together, but it was something else entirely." She opened the folder, revealing pages of technical specifications, old photographs, and handwritten notes. "Mom, do you recognize this design?" Eleanor leaned forward, studying the schematic spread before her. Recognition dawned slowly, then hit her with the force of a physical blow. "The Matheson valve," she whispered. Rachel nodded grimly. "The original design that started everything." The Matheson valve, named by combining their surnames when they were first married, had been Roger's breakthrough invention, the foundation upon which they had built their company. A revolutionary design for regulating fluid flow in manufacturing processes, it had been more efficient and durable than anything on the market in the late 1960s. "Why was your father researching this?" Eleanor asked, though a horrible suspicion was already forming in her mind. "Because of this." Rachel pulled out a newspaper clipping dated just 6 months earlier. The headline read, "ValveTech CEO claims predecessor stole revolutionary design." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "That's absurd. Your father developed that valve? I watched him work on the prototypes for months in our garage." "I know, Mom, but there's more." Rachel produced another document, an old yellowed letter. "I found this in Dad's personal files. It's from Walter Jenkins." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she took the letter. Walter Jenkins had been Roger's mentor at the engineering firm where he'd worked before starting Matthews Industries. He had passed away decades ago. The letter was brief, but devastating. "Roger, I'm concerned about the direction you're taking with the modified valve design. While I understand your improvements are significant, the core concept builds upon Harrison's work more than you've acknowledged. Please consider this carefully before proceeding with the patent application." Eleanor stared at the letter, her mind racing. "This doesn't prove anything. Engineers build on each other's work all the time." "That's what I thought too," Rachel said, "but then I found Dad's journal from that period." She hesitated. "Mom, he was troubled about this, really troubled. There are entries where he questions whether he gave enough credit to Edward Harrison, whether the patent should have included Harrison as a co-inventor." Edward Harrison. The name was vaguely familiar to Eleanor. He was one of the engineers at Walter's firm, wasn't he? "I met him once or twice at company functions." Rachel nodded. "And he's the grandfather of James Harrison, the current CEO of ValveTech, who's making these accusations." Eleanor sat back, trying to process this information. What exactly is he claiming? That his grandfather was the true inventor of the valve design that Matthews Industries built its fortune on? That grandpa essentially stole the concept, made some modifications and patented it as his own. Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. "Dad was investigating these claims privately. I think he was trying to determine if there was any merit to them before they became public." "And did he reach any conclusions?" Eleanor asked, her throat tight. Rachel shook her head. "If he did, I couldn't find them. His illness progressed so quickly at the end." She trailed off, both of them remembering those final difficult weeks. Eleanor sat in silence, absorbing the implications. If there was any truth to these allegations, the consequences could be devastating, not just financially, but for Roger's legacy and the family's reputation. Everything they had built together could be called into question. The remainder of the week passed in a whirlwind of activity as Eleanor reasserted her presence in the company. Each day brought new challenges: resistant board members, concerned shareholders, curious employees. But with each challenge met and resolved, her confidence grew. She wasn't just Roger's widow stepping in temporarily. She was Eleanor Matthews, co-founder and CEO of Matthews Industries, finally taking her rightful place in the spotlight rather than standing in Roger's shadow. By Friday afternoon, exhaustion had begun to set in. Eleanor sat in her office. She had moved to her own space rather than continuing to use Roger's, reviewing the week's events when Denise entered with a cup of tea. "You should go home, Mrs. Matthews," her assistant said kindly. "Everything is under control, and you've barely stopped all week." Eleanor accepted the tea gratefully. "You're right, I think I will. Would you please call Martin and ask him to bring the car around?" 20 minutes later, Eleanor was settling into the back seat of the company car when her phone rang. She glanced. At the screen, Rachel. "Hello, dear," she answered. "Mum, are you still at the office?" Rachel's voice held an unusual urgency. "I just left. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly, but I need to talk to you. It's important. Can I come over to your place in about an hour?" "Of course. I'll be there." Eleanor ended the call with a frown. Rachel rarely sounded so serious. What could be so urgent that it couldn't wait until tomorrow? The answer came precisely an hour later, when Rachel arrived at Eleanor's brownstone, carrying a thick folder and looking unusually tense. "I found something," she said without preamble, following Eleanor into the living room. "Something Dad was working on before he got sick." Eleanor felt a flutter of apprehension. "What is it?" Rachel placed the folder on the coffee table between them. "He asked me to help him research some of the company's early patents. I thought it was for the anniversary book we're putting together, but it was something else entirely." She opened the folder, revealing pages of technical specifications, old photographs, and handwritten notes. "Mum, do you recognize this design?" Eleanor leaned forward, studying the schematics spread before her. Recognition dawned slowly, then hit her with the force of a physical blow. "The Matheson valve," she whispered. Rachel nodded grimly. "The original design that started everything." The Matheson valve, named by combining their surnames when they were first married, had been Roger's breakthrough invention, the foundation upon which they had built their company. A revolutionary design for regulating fluid flow in manufacturing processes, it had been more efficient and durable than anything on the market in the late 1960s. "Why was your father researching this?" Eleanor asked, though a horrible suspicion was already forming in her mind. "Because of this." Rachel pulled out a newspaper clipping dated just 6 months earlier. The headline read, "Valve Tech CEO claims predecessor stole revolutionary design." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "That's absurd. Your father developed that valve. I watched him work on the prototypes for months in our garage." "I know, Mum, but there's more." Rachel produced another document, an old yellowed letter. "I found this in Dad's personal files. It's from Walter Jenkins." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she took the letter. Walter Jenkins had been Roger's mentor at the engineering firm where he'd worked before starting Matthews Industries. He had passed away decades ago. The letter was brief, but devastating. "Roger, I'm concerned about the direction you're taking with the modified valve design. While I understand your improvements are significant, the core concept builds upon Harrison's work more than you've acknowledged. Please consider this carefully before proceeding with the patent application." Eleanor stared at the letter, her mind racing. "This doesn't prove anything. Engineers build on each other's work all the time." "That's what I thought too," Rachel said. "But then I found Dad's journal from that period." She hesitated. "Mom, he was troubled about this. Really troubled. There are entries where he questions whether he gave enough credit to Edward Harrison, whether the patent should have included Harrison as a co-inventor." Edward Harrison. The name was vaguely familiar to Eleanor. He was one of the engineers at Walter's firm, wasn't he? "I met him once or twice at company functions." Rachel nodded. "And he's the grandfather of James Harrison, the current CEO of Valve Tech, who's making these accusations." Eleanor sat back, trying to process this information. What exactly is he claiming? That his grandfather was the true inventor of the valve design that Matthews Industries built its fortune on. That grandpa essentially stole the concept, made some modifications, and patented it as his own. Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. "Dad was investigating these claims privately. I think he was trying to determine if there was any merit to them before they became public." "And did he reach any conclusions?" Eleanor asked, her throat tight. Rachel shook her head. "If he did, I couldn't find them. His illness progressed so quickly at the end." She trailed off, both of them remembering those final difficult weeks. Eleanor sat in silence, absorbing the implications. If there was any truth to these allegations, the consequences could be devastating, not just financially, but for Roger's legacy and the family's reputation. Everything they had built together could be called into question. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" Eleanor finally asked. "No, just you." Rachel hesitated. "Mom, what do we do?" Eleanor looked at her daughter, seeing the worry etched in her face. Rachel had always been the most sensitive of her children, the one most concerned with ethics and integrity. If she was troubled by this discovery, it wasn't something that could be easily dismissed. "First," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt, "we need to understand exactly what happened. I was there when your father developed the Matheson valve, but I was handling the business side, not the engineering. I can't evaluate these technical claims." She thought for a moment. "We need someone we can trust implicitly, Someone with the engineering expertise to review all this material and give us an honest assessment. Michael, Rachel suggested. Eleanor nodded. Yes, but not just Michael. We need someone outside the PE. Family as well, someone with no stake in the outcome. She thought of the company's current chief engineering officer, Diane Chen. Diane had joined Matthews Industries fresh out of MIT 30 years ago and had earned a reputation for brilliant problem-solving and unwavering integrity. Diane Chen. She won't sugarcoat the truth for us. What if, Rachel hesitated, what if Dad did use Harrison's ideas without proper credit? The question hung in the air between them, painful in its implications. Eleanor took a deep breath. Then we make it right, she said simply. Your father built this company on innovation and integrity. If there was a lapse in either, we address it openly and honestly. We don't hide from the truth, Rachel, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Rachel's expression softened with relief. That's what I hoped you'd say. Eleanor reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. I know how much you value. Truth, sweetheart. It's one of the things I'm proudest of in all my children. She paused. But let's not jump to conclusions. There may be a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this. Your father was a good man. If he had concerns about the patent, he would have addressed them. Unless he ran out of time, Rachel said softly. The possibility hung between them that Roger had begun this investigation knowing his time was limited, trying to resolve a decades-old ethical question before it was too late. We'll find out, Eleanor promised, and whatever the truth is, we'll handle it the way your father would have wanted, with integrity. After Rachel left, Eleanor remained in her living room. For a long time, surrounded by the evidence her daughter had uncovered, she picked up the journal entries, recognizing Roger's distinctive handwriting. His words revealed a man wrestling with a complex ethical question, not someone callously covering up wrongdoing. Whatever had happened with the Matheson valve patent, Roger had been troubled by it. Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering those early days. They had been so young, so ambitious. Roger working endless hours in their garage on prototypes, Eleanor handling the business planning, both of them dreaming of building something that would last. Had that dream been founded on someone else's work? Had the cornerstone of Matthews Industries been laid with a fundamental injustice? She couldn't believe it. Not of Roger. And yet the evidence before her raised questions she couldn't ignore. Eleanor pulled out her phone and called Michael. I need you to come over tomorrow morning, she said when he answered. There's something important we need to discuss. After arranging the meeting, she called Diane Chen with the same request. Sleep eluded Eleanor that night. She lay awake, memories of the past 50 years washing over her. She and Roger had built something remarkable together. They had created jobs for thousands, contributed millions to their community, raised 3 children who understood the value of hard work and integrity. Surely that legacy couldn't be tainted by a mistake, if it was a mistake, made at the very beginning? But as dawn broke, Eleanor knew that the truth mattered. It had always mattered to Roger, and it mattered to her. Whatever they discovered about the Matheson valve, they would face it head-on. Michael arrived first the next morning, concern evident in his face when Eleanor explained why she had called him. Diane Chen arrived shortly after, professional as always in her tailored suit, her expression curious but composed. Thank you both for coming on such short notice, Eleanor said, leading them into Roger's study where she had arranged all the materials Rachel had discovered. We have a situation that requires your expertise and your discretion. She explained the allegations from ValveTech and showed them the documents, including Walter Jenkins's letter and Roger's journal entries. Michael's face grew increasingly troubled as he examined the technical drawings. Diane remained expressionless, her focus entirely on the materials before her. I need both of you to review everything here, Eleanor concluded. Compare the original Matheson valve design to Edward Harrison's work. Determine if there's any merit to these claims, and I need absolute honesty, even if what you discover is difficult. Michael looked up from the drawings. Mom, are you sure about this? If Harrison's grandson is already making accusations publicly, this could turn into a media nightmare, not to mention the potential legal implications. I'm aware of the risks, Eleanor replied steadily. But I can't make decisions based on half-truths. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Diane spoke for the first time. Mrs. Matthews, my team and I can conduct a thorough technical analysis of both designs. We'll need access to any existing documentation of Harrison's work. Rachel is tracking that down now, Eleanor said. She's reaching out to former colleagues of Edward Harrison who might have copies of his original designs. Michael shook his head. This is insane. Dad wouldn't have stolen someone else's work. He was the most honest person I've ever known. I agree, Eleanor said gently. But we can't simply dismiss these allegations based on our personal feelings. We need facts. She turned back to Diane. How long do you think this will take? Diane considered. With complete documentation, perhaps a week, possibly 2. It depends on the complexity of the designs and how much overlap there might be. Then let's say 2 weeks, Eleanor decided. In the meantime, this stays between the 4 of us and Philip, of course. We'll need to brief him as COO. Michael still looked troubled. And if they find that Dad did use Harrison's ideas? Eleanor met her son's gaze directly. Then we acknowledge it. We make restitution if necessary. We protect your father's legacy by showing that even when mistakes were made, we had the courage to address them honestly. Diane nodded approvingly. That's a principled approach, Mrs. Matthews. Not every company would choose that path. Matthews, Industries isn't every company, Eleanor replied. Roger built it on certain values. I intend to uphold those values, whatever the cost. As Michael and Diane left with copies of the materials to begin their investigation, Eleanor felt both dread and determination. She had meant what she said about upholding Roger's values, but she couldn't deny the fear that gripped her when she considered what might be discovered. If the company's founding patent was tainted, what would that mean for everything they had built? The next 2 weeks were among the most challenging of Eleanor's life. By day, she continued to assert her authority at Matthews Industries, addressing the ongoing concerns about her leadership, navigating board politics, and managing the company's day-to-day operations. By night, she found herself poring over old photographs and documents, trying to piece together memories from those early days when Roger had developed the Matheson valve. She remembered sitting at their kitchen table late into the night, Roger explaining his design modifications while she calculated production costs. She remembered the excitement in his voice when the first prototype worked exactly as he had predicted. She remembered his insistence on quality at every stage, his refusal to cut corners even when they were struggling financially. Would a man, so committed to excellence and integrity, have knowingly stolen another engineer's work? Eleanor couldn't believe it, and yet the evidence suggested there might be more to the story than she knew. Philip, when briefed on the situation, had reacted with immediate defensiveness. "This is ridiculous," he had declared. "Some failing. Company is trying to extort us with baseless accusations. We should shut this down immediately." "We will do nothing of the sort," Eleanor had replied firmly. "We will investigate thoroughly and respond based on facts, not assumptions." Philip had reluctantly agreed, though his expression made it clear he thought the entire exercise was unnecessary. Rachel had continued her research, tracking down former colleagues of Edward Harrison. Most were deceased, but she had located one retired engineer who had worked alongside Harrison in the 1960s. The elderly man had promised to search his personal archives for any documents related to Harrison's valve designs. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued her Saturday sessions with Thomas, beginning his education in the family business as promised. She was careful not to mention the Matheson valve investigation, wanting to protect him from adult concerns while still fulfilling her commitment to teach him about the company. "Grandma," Thomas asked during their second session, "what's the most important decision you ever made for the company?" Eleanor considered the question thoughtfully. "There have been so many crucial decisions over the years, it's hard to choose. Just one. But perhaps the most important wasn't a business decision at all." "What was it?" "It was deciding every single day to act with integrity even when it would have been easier not to tell the truth even when lies might have been more profitable in the short term, to treat people with respect even when the culture of the time didn't require it." Thomas looked at her curiously. That doesn't sound like a decision. That sounds like just being a good person. Eleanor smiled. Being a good person is a decision, Thomas. One you make anew each day with each challenge you face. And in business, where profit often seems like the only measure of success, it can be a very difficult decision indeed. Something in her voice must have betrayed her preoccupation, because Thomas reached out to place his small hand over hers. Are you making a hard decision now, Grandma? Eleanor looked at her grandson, so perceptive, so earnest. Yes, she admitted. I'm facing a situation where doing the right thing might be quite difficult. What would Grandpa say you should do? The question caught Eleanor off guard. What would Roger say? She thought about the journal entries Rachel had found, about his evident struggle with the question of the valve design, and suddenly she knew with certainty what he would advise. He would tell me to find the truth, and then to act on it with courage and compassion. Thomas nodded solemnly. That sounds like Grandpa. By the end of the 2 weeks, Eleanor had almost managed to convince herself that the investigation would exonerate Roger completely. Perhaps Edward Harrison had worked on a similar concept, but taken it in a different direction. Perhaps Roger's design, while inspired by Harrison's work, was truly original in its execution. Perhaps the similarities were coincidental. The concerns in Roger's journal merely the conscientiousness of a meticulous engineer. These hopes were dashed when Diane Chen requested a meeting with her, Michael, and Rachel. Eleanor knew from Diane's tone on the phone that the news wasn't what she had been hoping for. They gathered in Roger's study once again, the room that had always been the heart of their home, where so many crucial family and business decisions had been made over the decades. Diane arrived with a comprehensive binder of technical analyses, comparisons and notes. Michael looked tense. Rachel resigned. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Matthews," Diane began after they were all seated. "We've completed our investigation and the findings are complicated." Eleanor steeled herself. "Go on." The original Matheson valve, as patented by Roger Matthews in 1968, does incorporate significant elements of Edward Harrison's earlier design work, Diane said, her voice neutral and professional. Based on the documentation we've reviewed, Harrison had developed a prototype for a similar valve between 1965 and 1966, while working at Jenkins Engineering, Michael interjected. But Dad's design had crucial modifications, innovations that made it commercially viable. Harrison's prototype was never developed. Diane nodded. That's correct. Mr. Matthews made substantial improvements to the basic concept. The pressure regulation system in particular was entirely his own work and represented a significant advancement over Harrison's design. So it wasn't theft, Rachel said, relief evident in her voice. It was iteration, improvement. In engineering terms, yes, Diane agreed. However, from an intellectual property standpoint, the situation is less clear-cut. Based on patent law as it existed in the late 1960s, Harrison should likely have been credited as a co-inventor, or at minimum, his prior work should have been explicitly acknowledged in the patent application. Eleanor absorbed this information, her emotions a complex mixture of relief and disappointment. So Roger didn't steal the design outright, but he didn't give proper credit either. That appears to be the case, Diane confirmed, and based on his journal entries, he became aware of this ethical lapse later in life and was troubled by it. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, imagining Roger wrestling with this realization. How painful it must have been for a man who prided himself on his integrity to discover that the foundation of his success might be flawed. "What are the implications of this finding?" she asked, opening her eyes to look directly at Diane. Diane hesitated. From a legal standpoint, the statute of limitations on any patent infringement claims expired decades ago. However, from an ethical standpoint, and considering the public allegations being made by James Harrison, this presents a significant challenge, especially with Dad gone, Michael added quietly. He can't explain or defend his actions. But would he want to defend them? Rachel asked. His journal entries suggest he was moving toward acknowledging the problem. Eleanor considered this. "I think you're right, Rachel. If your father had lived longer, I believe he would have addressed this situation himself." She turned to Diane. Thank you for your thorough and honest assessment. Would you mind giving us some time as a family to discuss this?" After Diane departed, Eleanor looked at her 2 children present. "I need to call Philip. This concerns all of us." Philip arrived 30 minutes later, his expression hardening as Eleanor explained Diane's findings. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he said when she finished. "Now what? We issue some public mea culpa that damages Dad's reputation and opens us up to lawsuits from ValveTech." "We need to do what's right," Rachel countered. "Dad was trying to correct this. We should finish what he started." Michael, who had been quiet since Diane's departure, finally spoke. "The question isn't just what's right in an abstract sense. It's what's right for the company, for our employees, for the family legacy, and for your father's memory," Eleanor added softly. The 4 of them debated for hours, the discussion growing heated at times as different perspectives clashed. Philip advocated for a minimal approach, perhaps a private settlement with James Harrison to keep the matter quiet. Rachel argued for complete transparency, suggesting they publicly acknowledge Edward Harrison's contribution to the valve design. Michael wavered between these positions, seeing merit in both approaches. Throughout the discussion, Eleanor mostly listened, weighing each argument against her own understanding of what Roger would have wanted. She remembered their countless late-night conversations about the company, about legacy, about what it truly meant to succeed in business. "Enough," she finally said, raising a hand to halt the increasingly circular discussion. "I've heard all your perspectives and I appreciate them, but ultimately this decision falls to me." Her 3 children fell silent, watching her expectantly. "Tomorrow morning, I want to meet with James Harrison," Eleanor announced. "Not with lawyers, not with publicity. Just a straightforward conversation between 2 people whose families share a complicated history." "Mom, that's too risky," Philip protested. "I disagree," Eleanor replied calmly. "The riskiest approach would be to try to bury this or fight it. The truth has a way of emerging, especially in today's world. Better to address it directly and with dignity." Rachel nodded. "I think that's the right approach. But what will you say to him?" Eleanor smiled slightly. "I'll tell him the truth, as we understand it now. And then I'll propose a solution that honors both our families' contributions." "And if he's not receptive," Michael asked, "if he's determined to damage our reputation?" "Then we'll deal with that situation when it arises," Eleanor said. "But I suspect James Harrison is more interested in recognition than revenge. His grandfather's contribution to a groundbreaking design was overlooked. He wants that acknowledged." "And you're willing to give him that?" Philip asked incredulously. "I'm willing to give him the truth," Eleanor corrected. "Nothing more, nothing less." As her children left, Philip still skeptical, Rachel supportive, Michael thoughtful, Eleanor remained in Roger's study, surrounded by the evidence of his life's work. She picked up a framed photograph from his desk, the 2 of them at the opening of the first Matthews Industries factory in 1973. They looked so young, so hopeful, their entire future stretching before them. "What would you do, Roger?" she murmured. To the photograph. "If you were here now, how would you handle this?" The answer came to her with surprising clarity, not in words but in a certainty that settled in her heart. Roger would face this challenge head-on, with honesty and grace. He would acknowledge where he had fallen short, make amends where possible, and move forward with renewed commitment to the values he had always espoused. Eleanor placed the photograph back on the desk and picked up the phone. "Denise," she said when her assistant answered, "I need you to arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning with James Harrison, CEO of ValveTech. Tell him it's a personal request from Eleanor Matthews regarding his grandfather's work. And Denise, no lawyers, no publicity, just him and me." The following morning, Eleanor arrived at the neutral location she had suggested for the meeting. A private room at the Chicago Historical Society, where an exhibit on the city's industrial history currently featured both Matthews Industries and the lesser-known ValveTech. It seemed fitting to meet surrounded by the evidence of both companies' contributions to the city's development. James Harrison was already waiting when she arrived. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with his grandfather's distinctive aquiline features evident in his face. He rose when she entered, his expression guarded but curious. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, extending his hand, "I appreciate you reaching out, though I must admit I was surprised by your invitation." Eleanor shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Mr. Harrison. I believe we have important matters to discuss." They sat across from each other at a small table. Eleanor took a moment to gather her thoughts, studying the man whose public accusations had set these events in motion. "I've recently become aware of your grandfather's work on fluid control valve designs in the mid-1960s, she began. Specifically, his work that predated the development of what became known as the Matheson valve. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "My late husband and I have had our engineering team conduct a thorough analysis of both designs. Their conclusion is that while Roger made significant modifications and improvements to the basic concept, Edward Harrison's prior work should have been acknowledged in the patent application." Harrison leaned forward, surprise evident in his face. "I wasn't expecting such a direct acknowledgement." "I believe in addressing problems directly, Mr. Harrison," Eleanor replied. "The truth is that my husband was a brilliant engineer who made a significant contribution to industrial valve technology. The truth is also that your grandfather developed important conceptual groundwork that Roger built upon, and that contribution wasn't properly recognized at the time." "Why are you telling me this now?" Harrison asked. "Your lawyers could have fought my claims for years." "They could have," Eleanor agreed, "but that wouldn't have been the right thing to do. Roger valued integrity above all else in business. In his later years, he became concerned about this very issue. Though his illness prevented him from resolving it before his death, she met Harrison's gaze directly. "I'm here to finish what he started." Harrison sat back, studying her with new interest. "What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Matthews?" Eleanor reached into her briefcase and removed a folder containing the proposal she had worked on late into the previous night. "I'm proposing that Matthews Industries publicly acknowledge Edward Harrison's contribution to the development of the foundational technology that became the Matheson valve. We would issue a joint press release detailing both men's contributions to the design." She slid the folder across the table. "Additionally, we would establish the Harrison Matthews Engineering Scholarship at the Illinois Institute of Technology, funding advanced degrees for promising engineers with a focus on industrial design innovation. And finally, we would display both the original Harrison prototype, if it still exists, and the first Matheson valve side by side in the Matthews Industries Museum, with explanatory text honoring both men's work." Harrison opened the folder and scanned the documents inside, his expression unreadable. "This is unexpected, is it?" Eleanor asked. "You've spent years trying to get recognition for your grandfather's work. I'm offering that recognition freely and publicly." "But with no financial settlement?" Harrison looked up from the documents. "The value of that valve, designed to Matthews Industries over the decades, has been incalculable. And Roger's improvements made it commercially viable," Eleanor countered. "This isn't about money, Mr. Harrison. It's about historical accuracy and professional respect. It's about acknowledging that innovation is often built upon the work of those who came before us." Harrison was silent for a long moment, considering her words. "My grandfather died believing his best ideas had been taken from him. He was bitter about it until the end. I grew up hearing those stories, seeing that bitterness firsthand." Eleanor nodded sympathetically. "I understand that must have been painful for your family, and while I can't change the past, I can help ensure that your grandfather's contribution is recognized going forward. Isn't that what you've been fighting for?" "Partly," Harrison admitted, "but I also wanted some measure of justice." "Justice can take many forms," Eleanor said gently. "The scholarship will help future generations of engineers. The public acknowledgement will set the historical record straight. Your grandfather's legacy will be honored alongside Roger's. Isn't that a form of justice?" Another long silence followed as Harrison continued to review the proposal. Finally, he looked up. "I need time to consider this and to discuss it with my board." "Of course," Eleanor replied. "Take whatever time you need." My offer stands." As they rose to leave, Harrison hesitated. "My newspaper statements. They were harsher than they should have been. I called your husband a thief, essentially." Eleanor met his gaze. "We all say things in anger or frustration that we might phrase differently given time to reflect. What matters now is how we move forward." Harrison nodded slowly. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mrs. Matthews. This wasn't what I expected at all." "Sometimes the unexpected path is the right one," Eleanor replied, extending her hand once more. "I hope we'll speak again soon." As she left the meeting, Eleanor felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The conversation hadn't resolved everything, but it had opened a door to a resolution that honored both the past and the future. She had faced a difficult truth and taken steps to address it openly and honestly. Roger would have approved. The next few days passed in tense anticipation as Eleanor waited for James Harrison's response. She briefed her children on the meeting and her proposal, receiving mixed reactions. Philip remained skeptical, Rachel was supportive, and Michael seemed to have made peace with the complexity of the situation. "You're taking a significant risk," Philip pointed out during a family dinner. "ValveTech could use this acknowledgement against us in other ways." "Sometimes principles require risk," Eleanor replied simply. On the 5th day after their meeting, Eleanor received a call from James Harrison. "I've discussed your proposal with my board," he said without preamble. "We've decided to accept it, with one additional request." "Which is?" Eleanor asked. "We'd like ValveTech to be considered as a potential partner for Matthews Industries' upcoming expansion into digital flow monitoring systems, not as a favor, but as a legitimate business opportunity. Our companies have developed along different paths, but I believe there could be valuable synergies." Eleanor considered this. The request wasn't unreasonable, and there might indeed be benefits to collaboration between the two companies. "I can agree to that. We'll have our teams evaluate the potential partnership on its merits." "Then we have a deal," Harrison said, the relief evident in his voice. "I'll have my people coordinate with yours on the press release and scholarship announcement." After ending the call, Eleanor sat at her desk, feeling a profound sense of completion. She had faced a challenge to Roger's legacy and transformed it into an opportunity to demonstrate the values that had always guided their company. It wasn't a perfect resolution, nothing in business or life ever was, but it was honest, principled, and forward-looking. The joint press release was issued the following week, acknowledging Edward Harrison's foundational work on the valve design and Roger Matthews's significant innovations that made it commercially viable. As Eleanor had hoped, the media response focused on the positive aspects of the announcement: two families coming together to honor engineering contributions, the establishment of the scholarship, the potential collaboration between Matthews Industries and ValveTech. There were some questions, of course, about why this acknowledgement had taken so long, but Eleanor addressed them directly in a brief interview. "As new information comes to light, we have a responsibility to act on it. My husband valued truth and integrity above all else in business. This announcement honors that legacy." The night after the press release, Eleanor hosted a family dinner at her home. All 3 of her children attended, along with their spouses and children. Thomas, ever observant, attached himself to his grandmother's side for much of the evening. "Are you okay, Grandma?" he asked quietly as they stood together in the kitchen, away from the others for a moment. Eleanor looked down at him with a smile. "I'm more than okay, Thomas. I'm at peace. Because of what you did about the valve thing." News traveled fast in families, Eleanor reflected. "Yes, partly because of that. It was a difficult situation, but I think we handled it in a way your grandfather would have approved of." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Dad says it was really brave. He says most companies would have just denied everything and fought about it for years." "That would have been easier in some ways," Eleanor admitted, "but not better, not in the long run." "Is that what you meant about deciding to be a good person every day, even when it's hard?" Eleanor felt a rush of pride and affection for her perceptive grandson. "Exactly that. It's easy to talk about values like honesty and integrity when everything is going well. The real test comes when honoring those values might cost you something." "Like money or reputation?" "Sometimes both," Eleanor said. But there are things more valuable than either. Your grandfather understood that. I hope I've made the right decisions to honor his legacy." Thomas looked up at her with complete certainty. "You have. Grandpa would be proud." Later that evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Michael raised his glass in a toast. "To Mom," he said, "for showing us all what courage and integrity look like in business and in life." As glasses were raised around the room, Eleanor felt a deep sense of gratitude. The past month had been among the most challenging of her life, losing Roger, asserting her authority at the company, confronting the complicated truth about the Matheson valve. Yet somehow, through it all, she had found her way forward by relying on the values she and Roger had always shared. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to Eleanor's life. She continued to lead Matthews Industries with quiet authority, but she also began the process of preparing the next generation. For leadership, Saturday mornings remained dedicated to Thomas's business education, but she expanded the program to include all of her grandchildren who showed interest. The trust she had established for them became more than a vehicle for ownership. It became a training ground for responsibility. Each grandchild, once they reached 16, would be assigned mentors within the company and begin learning the business from the ground up, just as Eleanor's own children had done. At the office, she initiated regular meetings with rising talent. Throughout the organization, regardless of family connection, Matthews Industries has always valued merit alongside loyalty, she told the assembled group at their first meeting. "The future of this company will be determined by the quality of your ideas and the strength of your character, not by your last name or your connections." The issue with the Matheson valve, rather than damaging the company's reputation, actually enhanced it. Business journals praised Matthews Industries for its ethical approach to a difficult situation. Some even suggested it might serve as a case study in business ethics classes. James Harrison proved to be a more reasonable partner than Eleanor had initially feared. The evaluation of potential collaboration between Matthews Industries and ValveTech revealed genuine opportunities for both companies, leading to a limited partnership agreement focused on digital monitoring systems. 6 months after Roger's passing, Eleanor felt the company was on solid footing once again. The board, having witnessed her decisive handling of both internal politics and external challenges, had largely fallen in line behind her leadership. Even James Matthews had grudgingly acknowledged her effectiveness, though their relationship remained strained. On a crisp autumn morning, Eleanor arrived at the office to find Thomas waiting in the lobby. It was a school day, and his presence was unexpected. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" she asked, concerned. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Grandma," he assured her. "Dad brought me. It's for a school project. We're supposed to interview someone we admire about leadership. I picked you." Eleanor felt a rush of emotion at his words. "I'm honored, Thomas, but you should have called first. I have meetings scheduled." "Dad already talked to Denise," Thomas said with a grin. "She rearranged your schedule so we could have an hour together. I have all my questions ready." Eleanor shook her head, torn between amusement and exasperation. The boy was showing the same initiative and determination that had characterized both her and Roger's approach to business. "Well, I suppose I can't argue with such thorough planning. Shall we go up to my office?" As they rode the elevator to the executive floor, Thomas bounced slightly on his toes with excitement. "I told my teacher all about what you did with the valve thing. She said it was a perfect example of ethical leadership." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Leadership isn't just about making the big decisions, Thomas. It's about all the small choices you make every day that build trust with the people around you." In her office, Thomas set up his recording device and notebook with solemn concentration. His first question caught her by surprise. "What was the hardest part about taking over after Grandpa died?" Eleanor considered carefully before answering. "The hardest part wasn't the business challenges, though there were many. It was continuing without my partner of 50 years. Your grandfather and I made all our important decisions together, even when we disagreed. Suddenly having to make those decisions alone, that was the hardest adjustment." Thomas nodded, writing in his notebook. "Is it easier now?" "Not easier," Eleanor said thoughtfully, "but different. I found my own rhythm, my own way of leading. and I've discovered strengths I didn't know I had." The interview continued for the full hour, Thomas asking increasingly insightful questions about leadership, decision-making, and building a successful organization. Eleanor answered each one honestly, treating her grandson with the same respect she would give any serious interviewer. "Last question," Thomas said finally. "What do you want your legacy to be?" Eleanor paused momentarily, taken aback by the depth of the question from someone so young. "That's quite profound for a school project," she remarked. Thomas shrugged. "My teacher said to end with something meaningful." Eleanor smiled. "Your teacher is wise." She thought for a moment before answering. "I don't think of legacy in terms of buildings or balance sheets or even the Matthews name on products around the world. Those things matter, of course, but they're not what I hope people remember most." She leaned forward slightly, holding her grandson's gaze. "I want my legacy to be the culture we created at Matthews Industries, a place where people are treated with dignity, where truth matters more than convenience, where profit never comes at the expense of principle. And beyond the company, I hope my legacy lives on in you and your cousins, in the values you carry forward in whatever paths you choose." Thomas nodded solemnly as he wrote down her words. When he finished, he looked up with unexpected emotion in his eyes. "I think Grandpa would say the same thing." "Yes," Eleanor agreed softly. "He would." After Thomas left for school, Eleanor remained at her desk reflecting on their conversation. Her grandson's final question about legacy had struck a chord. The past 6 months had forced her to consider exactly what she wanted to leave behind. Not just in terms of the company's financial health or market position, but in its fundamental character. She opened her calendar and made a note to schedule individual meetings with each of her grandchildren, even the youngest. If they were to be the future of Matthews Industries, they needed to understand not just how the company operated, but why it existed at all, the principles upon which it had been built, and the responsibilities that came with its success. The months passed, and Eleanor found a new balance in her life. She continued to lead Matthews Industries with the same steady hand that had guided it through previous decades. But she also began a gradual process of delegation, identifying key executives, both family members and others, who shared her vision for the company's future. Philip had proven himself an exceptional COO, his initial resistance to her leadership decisions giving way to a more collaborative approach. Rachel continued to expand the Matthews Foundation's impact, establishing new educational initiatives that would serve Chicago's communities for generations to come. Michael's technology division was thriving, adapting to the digital landscape, with innovations that would have astounded the young Roger Matthews, who had first sketched the Matheson valve in their garage decades ago. On the anniversary of Roger's death, Eleanor gathered the family at the lakeside home they had purchased 30 years earlier as a weekend retreat. After dinner, as the sun set over Lake Michigan, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson, she raised her glass. "To Roger," she said simply. "A year ago we lost him, but his spirit remains in everything we do, in every decision we make, in every value we uphold." Glasses were raised around the table, the soft murmur of "to Roger" echoing among those who had loved him. Later, as the family dispersed throughout the house and grounds, Eleanor found herself sitting alone on the deck, watching the last light fade from the sky. Thomas appeared beside her, silently taking the chair next to hers. "Are you sad, Grandma?" he asked, after a while. Eleanor considered the question. "Yes," she acknowledged. "I miss your grandfather every day, but I'm also proud of him, of what we built together, of our family, of how we've faced the challenges of this past year." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Dad says the company is doing better than ever. He says it's because of you." "It's because of all of us," Eleanor corrected gently. "Each person playing their part, contributing their talents, upholding our shared values. Like when you stood up at the will reading," Thomas observed, "when no one else believed in you." Eleanor smiled at the memory, at her grandson's clear voice declaring, "She built this family. She decides everything." 7 words that had changed the course of events, spoken with such conviction by a child who somehow understood what many adults in the room had failed to grasp. You know, Thomas, sometimes the most important moments in our lives aren't the grand gestures or the public victories. Sometimes they're the quiet decisions we make when no one is watching, the principles we uphold, even when it would be easier not to. Like with the valve thing? Yes, Eleanor agreed, like with the valve thing. But also like all the small choices your grandfather made every day for 50 years, to treat people with respect, to prioritize quality over quick profits, to build something that would last beyond his own lifetime. Thomas was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. Then he asked, "Are you going to keep running the company forever?" Eleanor laughed softly. "No, not forever. No one should. Part of responsible leadership is knowing when to step aside and let new voices take the helm. When will that be?" "When I'm confident that those new voices understand what matters most," Eleanor replied. "When I know the company will continue to reflect the values your grandfather and I believed in." "Will that be Dad, or Aunt Rachel, or Uncle Philip?" "Perhaps," Eleanor said, "or perhaps it will be someone from your generation when the time comes. The important thing isn't the name or the bloodline, it's the character and the vision." As darkness settled over the lake, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. The year following Roger's death had been one of the most challenging of her life, filled with grief and uncertainty, confrontation and difficult truths. Yet through it all, she had remained steadfast to the principles they had shared, transforming challenges into opportunities to reinforce what Matthews Industries truly stood for. The whispers in the attorney's office a year ago seemed distant now, the doubts about her leadership capacity long since silenced by her actions. She had faced down boardroom politics, family tensions, and ethical dilemmas with the same quiet strength that had characterized her entire career. She had proven that she was not merely Roger's widow, but a leader in her own right, capable of guiding the company they had built together into its next chapter. And perhaps most importantly, she had begun the process of preparing the next generation, not just transferring knowledge or ownership, but instilling the values that would ensure Matthews Industries remained true to its founding principles long after she was gone. "Grandma," Thomas said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Eleanor turned to him, surprised by the declaration. "Like me?" "Strong," Thomas clarified. "Brave. Someone who does the right thing even when it's hard. Someone who builds things that last." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes, unexpected and uncharacteristic. She reached out to pull her grandson close in a rare display of emotion. "You already are, Thomas," she whispered. "You already are." The following morning, as the family prepared to return to the city, Eleanor found herself alone in the master bedroom, placing the last of her belongings in her overnight bag. She paused, her gaze falling on a photograph on the bedside table. She and Roger on their 50th wedding anniversary, both of them laughing at something now forgotten. She picked up the frame, tracing Roger's face with her fingertip. "We did well, didn't we?" she murmured to the image. "Not perfectly, but well, and they'll carry it forward, each in their own way." Eleanor placed the photograph in her bag, alongside the leather-bound notebook that had belonged to Roger. These tangible connections to him remained precious to her, even as she forged her own path forward. As she joined the family downstairs, Eleanor was struck by the tableau before her. 3 generations of the Matthews family gathered in the sunlit living room, engaged in animated conversation. Philip gesturing emphatically to make a point to his teenage daughter, Rachel showing her young son something on her tablet, Michael and his wife laughing with Thomas about some shared joke. This, Eleanor realized, was the true legacy she and Roger had created. Not just a successful company or material prosperity, but a family bound together by shared values and mutual respect. A family that understood that wealth brought responsibility, that success was measured in more than financial terms, that integrity mattered above all else. As they drove back to Chicago, the skyline growing larger on the horizon, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose. The year of grief and challenge had forged her into a stronger leader, a wiser matriarch. She had navigated the company through troubled waters and emerged with a clearer vision for its future. The Matthews Industries headquarters came into view, the company name illuminated against the clear blue sky. Eleanor remembered the tiny office where it had all begun, the second-hand furniture, the single telephone, the dreams that had seemed almost too ambitious at the time. "We're home," Michael said from the driver's seat, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Yes," Eleanor agreed, her gaze fixed on the building that stood as a testament to decades of vision, hard work, and principled leadership. "We certainly are." In the weeks that followed, Eleanor implemented the succession plan she had been developing since Roger's death. It wasn't a simple transfer of power, but a carefully orchestrated transition that would unfold over several years, ensuring stability and continuity while making room for fresh perspectives and innovation. Philip would assume more of the day-to-day operational responsibility. Rachel would take a larger role in strategic planning, bringing her unique perspective on corporate social responsibility. Michael would lead the company's technological evolution, ensuring Matthews Industries remained at the forefront of its industry. Eleanor herself would transition to the role of chairman of the board, maintaining oversight while creating space for the next generation to lead. It was a role that would allow her to focus on the company's values and long-term vision while stepping back from daily management. The announcement was made at a company-wide meeting, with all three generations of the Matthews family present. On the stage, as Eleanor outlined the transition plan, she could feel the approval of the assembled employees, not just acceptance, but genuine enthusiasm for the company's future direction. Matthews Industries has always been more than a name on a building or products, she concluded. It's been a set of values put into action every day by everyone who works here. Those values, integrity, innovation, respect, responsibility, will continue to guide us, no matter whose name appears on the organizational chart. The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the respect Eleanor had earned through decades of principled leadership, culminating in the challenges she had faced and overcome in the year since Roger's passing. After the meeting, as the family gathered in the boardroom that had witnessed so many crucial decisions over the years, Thomas approached his grandmother with a small package. "This is for you," he said, uncharacteristically shy, "to say thank you for everything you've taught me this year." Eleanor unwrapped the package to find a small, elegantly crafted wooden box. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a compass, old-fashioned, brass, beautifully made. "It's like the one Grandpa had in his study," Thomas explained. "The one he showed me when I was little. He said a good leader always needs to know which way is true north, no matter how stormy it gets." Eleanor held the compass in her palm, feeling its weight, watching the needle swing steadily to point north. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you, Thomas." "Are you really okay with stepping back?" he asked, his perceptiveness once again catching her off guard. "After everything you did to take control?" Eleanor smiled. "Taking control was never the goal, Thomas. It was about ensuring that Matthews Industries stayed true to its founding principles, and now I'm confident that it will, because of your father and aunt and uncle, because of all the good people who work here, and someday because of you and your cousins." She closed the compass and placed it carefully back in its box. True leadership isn't about holding on to power. It's about empowering others, showing them the way forward, and then trusting them to find their own path while staying true to what matters most. Thomas nodded, absorbing her words as he had absorbed so many lessons over the past year. 7 words, he said suddenly. "What's that?" Eleanor asked. "At the will reading, I said 7 words. She built this family. She decides everything. But you were already deciding to give it all away someday, to us, to me." He looked at her with newfound understanding. "That's what real power is, isn't it? Not keeping it, but knowing when to pass it on." Eleanor felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly took her breath away. "Exactly right," she said. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you. As am I." As the family dispersed, each returning to their respective responsibilities, Eleanor remained in the boardroom for a moment, the compass box in her hands, the view of Chicago stretched out before her through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city had changed so much since she and Roger had arrived as newlyweds with dreams larger than their resources. The skyline was different, The industries transformed, the pace of life accelerated. But some things remained constant. The value of hard work and integrity, the importance of family and community, the power of principled leadership to transform challenges into opportunities. These were the true constants, the true north, that had guided Eleanor and Roger throughout their lives together and would continue to guide those who came after them. Eleanor placed the compass in her purse and gathered her papers. She had a meeting with the transition team in 15 minutes, the first step in the carefully planned succession that would secure Matthews Industries' future. There was still much work to be done, many decisions to be made, many lessons to be passed on. But for the first time since Roger's death, Eleanor felt complete confidence in the path ahead. The company they had built together would continue to thrive, not just as a successful business enterprise, but as a living embodiment of the values they had always held dear. And their family would continue to grow and evolve, each generation, adding its own unique contributions, while honoring the legacy of those who had come before. As she walked toward the conference room, Eleanor's steps were light, her purpose clear. The widow who had once been dismissed in the attorney's office had transformed grief and challenge into renewal and opportunity. She had proven that true strength comes not from power or position, but from unwavering commitment to one's principles, especially when tested by adversity. To every widow who is overlooked, underestimated, or laughed at when the ink dries, remember this: you are not a leftover. You are the signature at the bottom of everything that matters. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.